you wanted more of Elizabeth and here on the Soul-u-tions podcast. And so we have brought her back for another episode. So see you on the other side of the intro.
Einstein said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." Most everyone in the world is solving their problems the wrong way. Our problems come from our thinking, and we can solve them with our thinking. So whether you're at your lowest, just trying to grow, or whether you are trying to sustain growth over your lifetime, join us as we push the boundaries of our current thinking and redefine how we find Soul-u-tions.
The hope and the strength and the love and the smiles and the laughter of friends and family. Add it up, you'll find no limit to the possibilities.
In case you missed the last episode and you are brand new to the Soul-u-tions podcast, my name is Tara Simkins, and I have the pleasure and privilege to have Elizabeth Elliott on the podcast for a second time. You're the first second timer, by the way, Elizabeth.
What?
Yes. You are.
I'm going to just take that in.
Just take it in for a second. It's a moment. And even my kids, Brennan was on a podcast with me earlier this summer. And I said, well, do you want to go again? He goes, I think you need to get Christopher before I come back around again. So I've had my oldest son, Nat, my second son, Brennan. And so Christopher's out there to be interviewed. Turner, my husband, swears he's going to come on one day.
Is?
Yeah, we'll see when that happens.
Actually, that would be a really great podcast.
Good, wouldn't it?
I'm going to encourage him.
Yeah, please do.
I will.
And, but Elizabeth this is her second one. I'm so excited. And we were just chatting before we started rolling on the tape here. Elizabeth was sharing about her ADHD.
Right? So if you're listening today, buckle up. I might take a sharp left turn when I see a squirrel.
But that's the best. Those are the best conversations. And no matter if we stay on script or if we don't, we promise you that there's going to be so much value in just listening to our conversation, between us here, we have 30 years of coaching, professionally coaching people week in, week out, 30 years of experience and expertise doing that and working together.
Yes.
So we promise there's a lot of value that even when we can figure out a way to make something meaningful for you,
right?
You, the listener.
So put those lenses on and find the value for yourself. And if you hear something, you're like, aha, that's really great. As you, in the last podcast, said, write it down.
Write it down and then figure out a way to make an action item out of it. Okay, so I didn't get to ask you this about the last podcast. So if you're listening, listen through this one, and then hopefully it'll just go right into the one from before if you haven't heard it yet. But in our last conversation, was there something in particular that stood out for you that you would like to reinforce, like to jump off of for this conversation?
I think the most important, not the most important, we had a lot of important points, but the one that really hit home to me was just this idea of what we're hearing and how we interact with that. Like what kind of, does it resonate with me? Does it not?
Yeah.
Because either response is super valuable in taking the moment to figure out what does resonate with you.
Yes.
And then moving from that place.
Right.
So as you've taught me, oftentimes, like what you don't want is just as valuable as knowing what you do want.
What you do want.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that. So we just finished the Soul-u-tions Labs fall launch, and I was going back with my copywriter who helps me. We have been working together for several years, just talking about writing better. Like I've been working with her for 2.5 years on like, I want to be able to explain what we do and the pain points, like really understand where women in particular, because this is in regards to the Soul-Shine Lab, which is a membership for women. And like, what are the things that really challenge women during different points in their life, with a particular emphasis during midlife, which I would say would be, 35 to 65.
Right.
So we were going through looking at all of the emails because we can track and say like who opened them, and depending, so there were 12 emails that went out. We were looking at all the stats, who opened them, who clicked through, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the stat for unsubscribes. And so she circled the largest number, like one email, out of 907 people who received the email, 5 out of 907 unsubscribed. And that was my highest unsubscribe number. So she said, to your point, she goes, oh, I want to know more about this because that means we were doing something right.
I was about to say, that's your most valuable email.
That's my most valuable because it tells me that we are speaking so clearly about something that at least, that 5 people knew, I'm out, this isn't for me.
Right.
Yeah.
And which that's, if you happen to be listening,
yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
What is it that you heard or read that like interacted with you in a way that you were like, I'm out.
I'm out.
Like, that's really valuable information to know.
And then she said, we know that for every one of those 5 that knew that they were out, there were 5 that were like, tell me more.
Right.
I'm definitely in. So the clearer, like when you are making decisions, going back, so we talked more, we talked about decisions in our previous conversation. And I just don't think you can ever talk too much about the value of making decisions.
I think it's the most powerful thing we can do.
Yeah.
It gives your brain something to solve for. It gives you a starting point from which to move.
Right. Yeah.
If indecision, you just, and you gave me a great visual for that. Do you remember that one time in a coaching call?
Remind me.
It was 2012 and I was vacillating between, I think probably should I move here or should I move there?
Right.
And you held your hands up and you showed me how I was just kind of bouncing between the two. And you're like, yeah, there is some safety in that.
Right.
Because you're just shifting foot from, your energy from foot to foot. But what is it in your heart and in your gut that you think is the decision you want to make right now?
Right now.
And I was like, I was afraid to say, no, I want to go here.
Right.
Because I kind of already knew.
Yes.
You know?
You knew.
Right.
Yeah. But you're just afraid. And so I so appreciate you sharing that visual with our listeners, because I want you to think about that. That people do come to us often and they just will use the term, I'm stuck.
Yeah.
I feel stuck. And you're like, okay, stuck in what? Well, what you're really stuck in is, if you're listening to this, if you're like, every time I say I'm stuck, if you just finish the sentence for yourself with this, I'm stuck in indecision.
Yes.
And I would say 9 out of 10 times, the next right step is just to make a decision.
Yes.
And not worry about it being right or wrong. But it will immediately release the dam of energy, because right now your energy is just going from the left foot to the right foot, just like with your weight. You're just going between one side and the other, and there's no more movement. It's like kind of like treading water, right? But if you make a decision and you're like, okay, we're going to go on the right side, then you take another step toward the right, and another step toward the right, right?
And then you have evidence. You can say, oh, okay, you change your view when you take that first step.
Right.
Now you have something to actually evaluate. You really can't evaluate until you make a decision.
All right, so let's give everybody a concrete example, because to you and me this makes sense. We talk a lot in abstract and kind of the intellectual side, and so someone's saying, "Okay, I get it, but Like, what does that really look like in real life? Do you have an example that you love to give about,
how to make
or a specific decision? Like I always go back to like my most powerful example of that in my entire life, and where it really, I really understood that on a level I'd never truly understood the power of decision before. But it was 2010, December 2010, and Brennan's third transplant had failed, and it was December. And he had been through ICU, all of that had come back. But we needed to make another decision. And that was this decision to have a fourth transplant or not. And we vacillated, Turner and I vacillated in what was the quote unquote right decision.
Right.
When you're talking
about the life of a child.
Yes.
Like,
yeah.
Whew.
And you're like, oh my gosh, if we make the wrong decision, he will die. If I make the wrong decision, he will die. And so we're at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And so on a transplant at St. Jude's at the time, there were 7 transplant doctors. The type of transplant that Brennan needed, a bone marrow transplant that for leukemia and other types of blood disorders. So we started they all had a different idea of whether we should wait, or make a decision. The lead doctor, Brennan's doctor, was like, you need to decide. The time is now to decide. And we're like, well, this doctor who was just on our service last week says she thinks that we should wait and that we should spend the time doing XYZ. So in that moment, back to why this memory is so powerful, he says, you just need to make a decision. Because then when you make the decision, the energy of that decision,
right?
He goes, you are killing yourself.
Right.
Literally, like our hearts were breaking.
I am sure.
We were losing sleep. We were not eating. We were not able to show up. Like we were so distracted when we were with the other 2 boys.
Sure.
Our parents would call, like it was just like Charlie Brown, wah, wah, wah. Our level of distraction, how much we were living in our heads and trying to play out all the decisions. And okay, but we just need someone else to weigh in on this. We just need someone else to weigh in on this. And Dr. Leong was like, I'm just going to call time on this, and we have to make a decision. And you have, 48 hours to make the decision. And then to make matters or compound matters, he's like, I said, well, what is the team decision? And he said, half the team is for it and half the team is against it. And he goes, what I want you to know is there is no right or wrong decision. Back to your point. There's just the decision that you make, and then this idea of having your own back.
Yes.
Never looking back and second guessing. He goes, we're going to all make a decision. We're going to be all on board with the decision, and no one is going to second guess the decision that you make. And I had never heard that before. I thought second guessing was something that smart, thoughtful, responsible people do.
Well, I just know that is what I had seen modeled.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, of course. So next time you'll make the right decision.
Right. You'll learn from your failures, right? The next time you make your decision. And I was like, wait a second. What do you mean we're never going to second guess? He goes, you will kill yourself.
Yeah.
Depending upon what the outcome of this is. We do not have a crystal ball. We can only make the best decision we have in the moment with the information that we have. And so the reason he gave us 48 hours was because he was like, you're going to have to make a decision with the information that you have right now.
Right.
And then just go forward with it. So that's my example. And I love to share it because it is so dramatic.
It is dramatic.
But it made such an impression on me. And I'm like, okay, then I had to take that experience and bring it back. And I'm like, how do we teach other people to do this?
Right.
When we, as you have said, what we've all been modeled, and not just that, but we know that our brain, from an evolutionary standpoint, we're all here because we learned from our mistakes.
Sure.
And we beat ourselves up for them so that we won't make them again.
But the interesting thing is, I think when we do that in that action, I think the more we beat ourselves up, the more we like to stay in indecision.
Yes. Well, we're afraid we're going to beat ourselves up if we make the wrong decision.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other piece of this about making a decision that I think is so interesting, and I think that probably my experience within Soul-Shine Lab and just twice a week.
Right.
Being in the work of coaching or listening to other people being coached, I know that either decision I make, there are going to be rewards and there are going to be challenges.
Say more about that, because I think people have this fantasy version.
For sure.
That there's one that is not going to have a challenge, right?
Right. We think, if we make the right decision, it's going to be easy and there's not going to be challenges along the way. Well, the decision you make is going to have 50%. You're going to feel the reward. You're going to feel the ease of the momentum moving forward. You're going to see evidence that it's working. And then there's going to be that other part, the other 50%, that you're going to have to use your energy to solve for the challenges.
Yes.
And thank goodness if you learn to make decisions without using up your resources of energy in the indecision process, you have more to help you really address the challenges that are inevitable.
Right. Okay, so I want everybody to really mark this point of the podcast and go back or rewind it right now and listen to what Elizabeth said, because I think that is really underappreciated how much energy indecision drains. It drains. If my first coach was like, you wake up in the morning and you have 100 units of energy. And so how much of that energy of indecision, which in the day of a computer as an ADHD person, I only have 1 million tabs open.
Right.
On my web browser.
Of course.
Right? But that is draining the computer's memory and functionality by holding all of that open.
Right.
So as a person, what you're saying is that the more decisions that we're holding open that are undecided.
Right. Well, and
it's
they're
taking
like
more
your
energy
tabs.
they're like your tabs.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, I know I do the same thing. I want to leave those tabs open because I might not remember what I needed there. But what if you just were like, I have the information that I need moving forward and another solution will present itself. Right. I don't have to go back to that tab to use that. So if I close that tab and conserve that energy, I'll have that energy to find the solution forward when I need it.
Okay, so that's another super important point that I want everybody, because that dovetails back to what Dr. Leong was saying. And you just have to say, so if you have a decision that you haven't made, what we want you to do is give yourself a definite time frame to make it in. Right?
Yes.
And you can ask yourself, that inner knowing, you're like, okay, do you feel like you could make that decision right now? Or do you need the night? Or do you need,
another decade?
Another decade. If you think you need another decade, you definitely need to make that decision right now.
Right. That means now.
That means now. Okay, so make a decision, give yourself a definite time frame, and I wouldn't keep it open for more than 48 hours to make that decision, and say, if I have, based on, and you can write this out in your journal, based on the information that I have right now, this is the decision I'm going to make. And then what Elizabeth just shared is the brilliance is once you make that decision, you reclaim your energy, you get your energy moving forward, and you have energy for the unexpected obstacles that are going to come up, right? You also have the momentum of having made that decision. So when you have new obstacles, what that's going to present you with is an opportunity to make another decision.
Right.
Right. And you want to keep that momentum going. And I always tell people, and I think you tell people this too, that this way of making decisions, instead of you looking out like what we were, polling all the experts, scouring the internet for more, is there something I'm missing? That thought, right? Is there something I'm looking for, the thing you're missing? You just say, I've got this. But if you get more information or more knowledge down the road, at that time, you can reconsider.
Absolutely. That's where a pivot comes in.
Right. Right. But I think people think like, oh, I'll make the wrong decision and then I'll find that out and then I'll blah, blah, blah. But we're just like, no,
That'll be too far down the road.
That'd be too far down the road. Right. You just like, oh, now I have some new information that I didn't have before.
Okay. So now it's time for a new decision.
Mm-hmm.
Do I need to slightly pivot?
Right.
Do I need to incorporate this information or do I just say, okay, no, I'm in this direction and I'm going to stay in this lane?
I love it. I love it.
It's easy. But I think the big piece that it was funny in hearing you share that back, that information about decision making is I think oftentimes what I hear with clients, the obstacle that they share with me in a coaching session, they'll use that as evidence that it was the wrong decision. They're looking for evidence of the wrong decision. So, and we just cut that off.
Right.
And I'll go, of course is the first thing to say. The challenge came up.
Yeah.
That is part of living. That is part of it. You're going to, 50%, it's going to be easy. 50% is going to be challenging. So now what?
Now what?
Of course. Now what? And then you keep moving forward.
And so then what you're doing is you're developing decision-making as a skill set.
Exactly.
And then someone has the confidence to say, oh, this is a skill set. I know how to make decisions, right? I like give myself a time frame. I say I've got to, with the information that I have.
Right.
Then I don't second guess it. When an obstacle comes up, I say, is there a new decision that needs to be made?
So, and it's funny, even as you're saying those thoughts, I'm thinking, how do I feel when I think these thoughts? I feel confident.
Right.
I feel directed. Like, oh, there's a path forward. I feel like I'm moving forward. It's a very different energy than as if you were second guessing it.
Yeah.
Oh, this obstacle came up. I made the wrong decision. How do you feel? Dejected? Do you feel confused? Very different result that you'll have.
Yeah. So instead of second guessing, it becomes a check-in.
Right.
Okay. Because I want people to know that, like, so that when you may not catch yourself until you've second guessed that you are in a moment, this podcast may be like, come to someone's memory in a moment that they're second guessing themselves, right?
Right.
And there's going to be this wiser part of them that were like, wait a second. I think what I'm doing is second guessing myself now. Tara and Elizabeth said that there's another option to do than to second guess yourself here.
Yes. What if I expected this obstacle? What would I have to learn from it? And then what information can I gather and then take some energy and move forward with? So
instead of second guessing, self-reflection. Like I've been trying to figure out, like, second guessing, self-reflection. Like, I'm like, what can we make this too easy for someone to remember?
Right?
Yeah. We have just recorded 2 podcasts back to back for y'all. And so I think this is our reminder that, if I lost that train of thought, I think that's our reminder that we've done enough.
We've done enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that we appreciate what we've done.
We appreciate what we've done.
And it's enough.
And we just made a really quick decision right then.
Love it. Look at us.
Look
Powerful.
At us. All right.
Directed.
Remind everybody
Confident.
again.
I'm Elizabeth Elliott. You can find me at my website, ihiredacoach.com. And on that, you will see an email.
Okay. Another easy decision that you can make is that decide that you want to join the Soul-u-tions Labs.
I mean, that's the best decision I have made.
I mean, it's just so great. And you can have lots of conversations. You have access to Elizabeth. You have access to me. And you have access to the women, the ladies of the lab.
You know what I think, too? Just to throw that out there, I find a lot of value in the library.
The library, yeah.
I mean, there are so many different classes that sometimes if I find myself spinning,
right,
I just listen to an old class and I always find a pearl that I can like, oh, wait, this is great. How can I use this today to help me stop the spinning and feel a little less stuck?
Brilliant. And I do think that there is a difference. Like, I love to listen to podcasts, but part of the coaching relationship is some sacred exchange of when we're talking about value. It's like, oh, I want to make sure that I get my $100 worth for the month, right? I want to make sure that I get my $1,200 worth, which is what it costs for a year to be a member. And so you're going to listen a little harder to the recordings that Elizabeth's talking about that are in our library. You're going to listen just with a little more attention and care and getting those nuggets out, because you're like, how can I extract this level of value? Because you have paid for it.
Exactly. I'm already invested. So where is the value for me?
Where's the value? Like, I just got a new pair of shoes for the season. I've splurged. I'm gonna wear the heck out of them. Get my
As my daughter
worth.
does, she breaks it down to per use.
Per use.
How much am I spending to wear these cute shoes?
Oh my gosh. So go to Tara Simkins, TaraSimkins, no P.com, and make sure you're on my email list and that you're on the wait list for the Soul-Shine Labs. It opens December the 26th.
We would love to have you.
We would love to have them, wouldn't we? Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you,
And
Tara.
we're going to love to have you back on the Soul-u-tions podcast for another conversation.
My pleasure.
'Cause I ain't done living the life I'm meant to lead. And I ain't done loving the ones who cared for me. The hope and the strength and the love and the smiles and the laughter of friends and family. Add it up, you'll find no limit to the possibility.